Robert Blackwell sat behind his large wooden desk in the Oakbridge Town Court, shuffling through the stack of cases for the day. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. After 15 years as a judge, days like these blurred together in his mind, a steady stream of minor offenses and small-town disputes. He adjusted his black robes and glanced at the clock.
9 o'clock. Time to begin.
Court is now in session, announced the clerk, as the small crowd settled into the wooden benches. Robert barely looked up as he called the first few cases. A speeding ticket, a dispute between neighbors about a fence, a shoplifting incident at the local market. He handled them efficiently, his decisions quick and practiced. By mid-morning, he was already thinking about lunch at the cafe across the street. Next case, he called, his eyes still on the paperwork before him. The clicking of sensible heels approached the defendant's table. Robert didn't immediately look up, instead reading the charge sheet. Parking violation in emergency zone, Town Hall, Thursday evening. Dr. Margaret Wilson, Your Honor, representing myself, said a composed, dignified voice. Something about the voice made Robert pause. He looked up to see a black woman in her early 60s standing tall before him. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, her silver hair cropped close to her head, and carried herself with unmistakable dignity. Her eyes held a quiet intelligence that seemed vaguely familiar to him, though he couldn't place why. Dr. Wilson, he said, his voice taking on the slightly bored tone he often used for minor infractions, you're charged with parking in a restricted emergency zone outside the town hall last Thursday evening at approximately 7:15 p.m. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, she replied, her voice steady and clear. There were extenuating circumstances that I would like to explain to the court. Robert leaned back slightly in his chair, gesturing for her to continue. He'd heard countless explanations over the years, emergencies, confusion about signs, brief stops that somehow stretched into hours. Rarely did they change his ruling. Your Honor, Dr. Wilson began, I was attending the community fundraiser at the town hall when I noticed an elderly gentleman, Mr. Thomas, collapse on the pavement just outside the building. I'm a medical doctor by training, though I now work in education. I pulled my car into the closest space, which happened to be the restricted zone, so I could reach him quickly and provide immediate assistance until the ambulance arrived. Robert nodded, having heard similar stories before. And did you move your vehicle once medical professionals arrived? The ambulance blocked me in, Your Honor. By the time they departed with Mr. Thomas, Officer James had already issued the citation. I see, Robert said, making a note on his pad. Do you have any witnesses or documentation to support this account? I have a letter from Mr. Thomas, she said, presenting a paper to the clerk, who brought it to Robert. He's still recovering at home but wanted to express his gratitude. Robert skimmed the letter, which indeed confirmed her story. Still, he felt the familiar pull of upholding the law as written. Emergency zones existed precisely because emergencies happened. Good intentions didn't change the fact that an ambulance might have needed that exact space. Dr. Wilson, while I appreciate your desire to help in an emergency situation, the law regarding emergency zones is quite clear. These spaces must remain available for official emergency vehicles. Something flickered in Dr. Wilson's eyes, not anger, but a quiet disappointment that made Robert strangely uncomfortable. The court finds you guilty of the parking violation. The fine is £200. Dr. Wilson's expression remained composed as she nodded slightly. I understand, Your Honor. As she turned to leave, Robert felt a nagging sensation in the back of his mind. There was something familiar about her, the way she stood, the measured precision of her words, the dignified disappointment in her gaze. But the next case was already being called, and he pushed the thought aside. By noon, he had forgotten about Dr. Wilson entirely, just another case in a busy morning docket. That evening, driving home through the rain-slicked streets of Oakbridge, the name returned to him. Wilson. Margaret Wilson. Why did it sound so familiar? The question followed him home, settling into his thoughts like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave that evening. Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he knew Dr. Wilson from somewhere. He sat in his study at home, a cup of tea growing cold beside him as he stared at the rain streaming down the window. Outside, the lights of Oakbridge twinkled through the darkness, but his mind was elsewhere.
His wife, Emma, appeared at the doorway. "You've been quiet tonight, Robert. Difficult day at court?"
Not particularly, he answered, frowning slightly.
"Just a nagging feeling about someone I saw today."
A Dr. Margaret Wilson. The name sounds so familiar, but I can't place her.
Emma settled into the armchair across from him. "Margaret Wilson? Wasn't she one of your professors at Oxford?" Robert's eyes widened as the memories suddenly flooded back. Professor Wilson.
Of course. The brilliant, demanding law professor who had pushed him harder than anyone else during his university days.
The woman whose letter of recommendation had helped secure his first position at the district attorney's office.
Good Lord, he whispered, the realization washing over him like cold water.
I just fined my former law professor £200 without even recognizing her. You didn't recognize her? Emma asked, surprised.
Robert shook his head slowly. I barely looked at her, Emma.
I was so focused on getting through the docket.
His voice trailed off as shame crept through him.
That night, sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, remembering Professor Wilson's classes.
She had been famous for her course on judicial ethics and bias in the legal system.
How many times had she warned them about the dangers of rushing to judgment? How often had she spoken about seeing the person behind the case? A good judge listens first and decides second, she had told them. The moment you stop seeing the human being standing before you is the moment you should step down from the bench. By morning, Robert looked haggard.
He dressed carefully, his movements deliberate as he prepared for court.
Today would be different.
Today, he would remember what Professor Wilson had taught him all those years ago. At the courthouse, he arrived early and went straight to his chambers.
He pulled out the case file from yesterday and studied Dr. Wilson's information.
Yes, it was definitely her, Professor Margaret Wilson, now Dean of Law at Cambridge University, visiting Oakbridge for a community legal aid fundraiser. The very fundraiser where she had stopped to help an elderly man who collapsed. Robert closed the file and called in his clerk. James, I need to review yesterday's ruling on the Wilson parking violation. Please schedule a hearing for this afternoon and contact Dr. Wilson.
The clerk looked surprised but nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The morning court session passed in a blur.
For each case, Robert made a conscious effort to look directly at the person speaking, to listen carefully to their words, to consider their circumstances. It slowed the proceedings considerably, but he found himself making more nuanced decisions.
By afternoon, his stomach was in knots.
When Dr. Wilson entered his chambers at 3 o'clock, he stood immediately. Dr. Wilson, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk.
Thank you for coming on such short notice.
She studied him carefully, her expression neutral.
Judge Blackwell. I assume there's a reason you've asked me here. Robert took a deep breath. First, I want to apologize for not recognizing you yesterday. It was inexcusable.
It's been 27 years, Robert, she said, her tone softening slightly.
I wouldn't expect you to remember every professor. But I do remember you, he insisted. Your ethics class changed how I viewed the law.
You taught us to see the person, not just the offense.
And yesterday, I failed to follow that most basic principle.
Dr. Wilson's expression remained measured.
I didn't come back today for special treatment because we know each other.
I understand that, Robert replied.
And that's not why I've asked you here. I've reviewed your case again, including Mr. Thomas's letter and the incident report from the ambulance service. I believe I made an error in judgment yesterday.
He straightened in his chair. The purpose of that emergency zone is to ensure help can reach those in need.
You were providing that help.
While technically your vehicle was in violation, the spirit of the law was upheld by your actions. For the first time, Dr. Wilson smiled slightly. You always did understand the difference between the letter and the spirit of the law, Robert.
It was one of your strengths as a student.
Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders.
I dismissed the fine, Dr. Wilson. And I want to thank you. For what?
for reminding me, however unintentionally, of why I became a judge in the first place. The following day, Robert arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. The morning air was crisp, and the town of Oakbridge was just beginning to stir. He nodded to the security guard and made his way to his chambers, his mind still processing his conversation with Dr. Wilson. As he settled behind his desk, he noticed the stack of cases waiting for him seemed taller than usual. James, his clerk, knocked softly on the door.
"Good morning, Your Honor. You have a busy docket today. And there's someone waiting to see you."
Robert looked up, surprised.
"Who is it?" "Mr. Thomas, sir.
The gentleman from the incident with Dr. Wilson." Robert felt a flutter of curiosity.
"Please, send him in."
A few moments later, an elderly man with a walking stick entered the room.
He moved slowly but with determination, his weathered face showing both age and dignity.
"Judge Blackwell," he said, extending his hand.
"Thank you for seeing me. I'm George Thomas."
Robert shook his hand and gestured to a chair.
"Please, sit down, Mr. Thomas. What can I do for you?"
The old man settled into the chair with a sigh. "I heard what happened with Dr. Wilson.
The parking ticket and all that.
I wanted to come and tell you myself what she did for me."
Robert leaned forward, giving the man his full attention. "I'd like to hear it."
"I was at the fundraiser that night," Mr. Thomas began. "I'm not as steady as I once was, but I try to support community events when I can.
I felt dizzy as I was leaving.
Next thing I knew, I was on the ground, couldn't breathe properly." He paused, his eyes distant with the memory. People gathered around, but they were just standing there, watching. Then this car pulls up, and Dr. Wilson rushes out.
She cleared everyone back, checked my pulse, helped me breathe. Found my heart medicine in my pocket. Stayed with me until the ambulance came."
Robert nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "The doctor at the hospital told me if she hadn't acted so quickly, I might not have made it."
"She knew exactly what to do." Mr. Thomas leaned forward.
"Judge, that woman saved my life. And then she got a fine for her trouble." "I dismissed the fine, Mr. Thomas," Robert assured him.
"It was the right thing to do."
The old man smiled.
"Good. That's good. But I didn't come here just about the fine. I came because I heard something else about Dr. Wilson."
"Oh?"
Robert asked. "My granddaughter is a law student at Cambridge.
She tells me Dr. Wilson is known for something special. She takes her students to court every month, not to watch famous trials, but ordinary cases in small-town courts. She wants them to see how justice really works in everyday life." Robert felt a chill run down his spine.
"She was watching our court that day?" Mr. Thomas nodded.
"My granddaughter says she believes the real test of our legal system isn't the big, famous cases. It's how we handle the small ones, when no one important is watching." After Mr. Thomas left, Robert sat in silence for a long time. The weight of what he'd learned settled on him. Dr. Wilson hadn't just been in his courtroom by chance. She had been there to observe, to see justice in action in a small-town court.
And what had she seen?
A judge who barely looked up, who rushed through cases like items on a shopping list.
When court began that morning, Robert approached the bench with a new awareness.
He looked at each person who stood before him, really looked at them.
A young mother with a traffic violation. An elderly shopkeeper with a dispute over deliveries. A teenager with a skateboarding citation. Behind each case was a person, a story, circumstances that mattered.
He listened more carefully, asked more questions, and found himself making different decisions than he might have just 2 days ago. During the lunch break, he made a phone call to Cambridge University.
Dr. Wilson's office, answered a pleasant voice.
"This is Judge Robert Blackwell from Oakbridge Town Court.
I was wondering if I might speak with Dr. Wilson about a matter?"
"I'm sorry, Judge Blackwell.
Dr. Wilson is conducting a seminar right now. May I take a message?" Robert hesitated.
"Yes, please tell her I'd like to invite her to bring her students to my court anytime."
And
He paused, gathering his thoughts. Tell her that her former student is finally putting her lessons into practice. That afternoon, as Robert worked through the remaining cases, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. Each person who stood before him was no longer just a case number or an offense. They were people first, with lives and stories and circumstances that deserved to be heard. For the first time in a long while, Robert felt like the judge he had always wanted to be. 3 weeks passed since Robert's conversation with Mr. Thomas. The judge had made subtle but significant changes to how he ran his courtroom. He arrived earlier each morning to review cases more thoroughly. He made eye contact with everyone who stood before him. He asked questions that went beyond the basic facts, seeking to understand the circumstances behind each offense. The court staff noticed the change. James, his clerk, commented that proceedings were taking longer, but the atmosphere in the courtroom felt different, less tense, more respectful. "We're booked solid today, Your Honor," James said one Monday morning.
"And there's a special note about the afternoon session."
Robert looked up from his papers.
"What's the note?" "Cambridge University Law School will be observing. Dr. Wilson is bringing 20 students."
Robert's heart skipped a beat.
"Today?"
"Yes, sir.
They requested permission last week." "I thought you'd been informed."
Robert hadn't been told, but he understood why. Dr. Wilson wanted to see the real workings of his court, not a special performance put on for visitors.
The morning session went smoothly.
Robert handled each case with care, but his mind kept drifting to the afternoon.
What would Dr. Wilson think of the changes he'd made? Would she see that her former student was trying to live up to her teachings? At precisely 1 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened.
Dr. Wilson entered, followed by a line of young law students with notebooks in hand. They filled the back rows quietly.
Robert nodded in their direction but otherwise continued as normal.
The first case was a dispute between two neighbors over a damaged fence. In the past, Robert might have rushed through it, but today he listened carefully as both men spoke, asking clarifying questions and considering the impact on both families. Next came a young woman, Jenny Taylor, charged with shoplifting from the local market.
She stood nervously at the defendant's table, her hands trembling.
"Miss Taylor," Robert said gently, "please tell me what happened that day." Jenny looked up, surprised to be addressed directly.
I
took some baby formula and medicine, Your Honor."
"I know it was wrong." Instead of immediately pronouncing sentence, Robert asked, "May I ask why?"
The young woman's eyes filled with tears.
"My husband lost his job last month. Our savings are gone. Our baby was sick, and I was desperate.
I planned to pay it back on payday, but the store manager called the police right away." Robert glanced at the store owner, Mr. Phillips, who was sitting in the gallery.
"Mr. Phillips, were you aware of Ms. Taylor's circumstances?"
The older man shifted uncomfortably.
"No, Your Honor. But theft is theft." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, the law is clear.
However, justice must consider all factors."
He turned back to Jenny.
"Miss Taylor, do you have a previous criminal record?"
"No, Your Honor." "Never."
Robert considered for a moment, aware of the law students watching intently.
"Here is my ruling, Miss Taylor. You will pay for the items taken and perform 20 hours of community service.
Additionally, I'd like you to meet with our town's social services officer to see what assistance might be available for your family." He turned to Mr. Phillips. "And sir, I commend your vigilance in protecting your business. However, I hope in future cases, you might consider hearing a person's story before calling the authorities.
Sometimes compassion and understanding can lead to better outcomes for everyone."
As the afternoon continued, Robert felt Dr. Wilson's eyes on him. He didn't look in her direction, focusing instead on each case before him. Some required strict application of the law, others benefited from more creative solutions, but in every instance, he made sure the people involved felt truly heard.
When the final case concluded, Robert announced a 15-minute recess before addressing the law students.
As the courtroom cleared, he noticed Dr. Wilson approaching the bench. Interesting session, Judge Blackwell, she said, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone he remembered from law school. Thank you for bringing your students, Dr. Wilson, he replied, descending from the bench to speak with her directly.
I hope it was educational.
She studied him with those keen eyes that had intimidated him as a student.
You've changed your approach since our last encounter. Robert nodded.
I needed a reminder of some important lessons. The students noticed how you treated each person with dignity, she said.
How you listened to their stories.
I've come to realize that hearing the story is as important as applying the law, he admitted.
It's something I should have remembered all along. A small smile appeared on Dr. Wilson's face.
Better late than never, Robert. The true measure of a judge isn't in how many cases they process or how strictly they apply the letter of the law. It's in whether people leave their courtroom feeling that justice was done, that they were seen and heard as human beings. Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders at her words.
I have you to thank for that reminder.
6 months had passed since Dr. Wilson's visit with her students. Spring had given way to summer, and now autumn leaves drifted down on the streets of Oakbridge.
The changes in Robert's courtroom had become permanent.
He no longer rushed through cases, taking time instead to truly listen to each person who stood before him. Word had spread through the small town. People who entered his courtroom nervous and afraid often left feeling they had been treated fairly, even when the judgment went against them. It wasn't about being lenient, Robert still upheld the law firmly, but about making sure everyone felt respected and heard. On this particular Wednesday morning, Robert arrived at the courthouse to find an envelope on his desk. Inside was an invitation from Cambridge University Law School. Dr. Wilson was organizing a conference on compassionate justice in local courts and wanted him to be a guest speaker.
Robert smiled at the irony.
6 months ago, he had been the example of what not to do. Now, he was being asked to share his approach with others. As he prepared for the day's cases, there was a knock at his chamber door.
James entered, looking concerned.
Your Honor, there's been a special addition to today's docket.
I think you should know about it.
Robert looked up.
What is it, James?
Sir William Preston has filed a complaint against 3 teenagers for damaging his garden.
He's demanding maximum penalties. Robert frowned.
Sir William was one of the wealthiest and most influential men in Oakbridge, owner of the local factory and several businesses in town. He was known for his strict and often unforgiving nature.
Thank you, James. I'll review the file before we begin. The morning proceeded normally until Sir William's case was called.
The wealthy man strode confidently to the front of the court, his expensive suit and commanding presence filling the room.
Opposite him stood 3 teenage boys, looking terrified. The oldest couldn't have been more than 16.
Your Honor, Sir William began before Robert could speak, these hooligans destroyed rare plants in my prize-winning garden. I demand they be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Robert noticed how the boys trembled.
Thank you, Sir William.
I'll hear the facts of the case before making any decisions. He turned to the boys.
Would one of you like to explain what happened?
The oldest boy stepped forward nervously.
Your Honor, I'm Tom Baker.
These are my brothers, Harry and Jack. We were playing football in the park next to Sir William's house. I kicked the ball too hard, and it went over his wall. We climbed over to get it back, and Harry slipped and fell into a flower bed. They crushed plants worth hundreds of pounds.
Sir William interrupted.
Robert held up his hand. Sir William, everyone will have their chance to speak.
Please continue, Tom.
We tried to fix the flowers, Your Honor, but we made it worse.
We didn't mean any harm.
We offered to work to pay for the damage, but Sir William called the police right away.
Robert turned to Sir William. Is this accurate?
The details don't matter, Sir William said dismissively. They trespassed and caused damage.
The law is clear. Robert thought for a moment.
The law is indeed clear about property rights. It's also clear about proportional responses and the special considerations we give to minors. He studied the 3 brothers, then looked at Sir William. Boys, you did trespass and cause damage, regardless of your intentions.
That was wrong.
The boys nodded, eyes downcast. Sir William has the right to be compensated for his loss. Sir William smiled triumphantly. However, Robert continued, I believe in consequences that teach rather than simply punish. Here is my ruling, the boys will work in Sir William's garden every Saturday for 1 month, under his direction, to repair the damage and learn about the plants they harmed. They will also write a letter of apology. Sir William's face reddened.
But Your Honor.
Additionally, Robert continued calmly, if at the end of the month, Sir William reports that they have worked diligently, this incident will be expunged from their records. He looked directly at Sir William. This gives you your compensation, Sir William, and gives these young men a chance to learn from their mistake rather than be defined by it.
Do you accept this solution?
After a moment's hesitation, Sir William nodded stiffly.
As the courtroom cleared, Robert noticed a familiar figure sitting in the back row.
Dr. Wilson rose and approached the bench. You weren't expecting me today, she said with a small smile.
A pleasant surprise, Robert replied. Did you come to check on your former student?
I came to see if the changes had lasted, she admitted.
Many judges make temporary improvements when under observation. Robert smiled.
And your verdict? Most impressive, she said. Particularly with Sir William.
Not many judges would stand their ground with someone of his influence.
I've learned that true justice requires courage as well as compassion, Robert said.
Another lesson I should thank you for.
Dr. Wilson shook her head.
No, Robert. You've made these changes yourself.
You become the judge I always knew you could be. As she turned to leave, she added, your session at the conference is confirmed.
The title, The Person Behind the Case, Bringing Humanity Back to Justice.
Robert watched her go, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. One parking ticket had changed everything, reminding him of the true meaning of justice, seeing the human being behind every case, every time.